Well, hi everybody. Welcome to this is my second author interview in a couple of weeks. I said I had like a dry spell for a couple months, and then all of a sudden I came upon July, and July has been, I think I said in a story the other day, my best reading month in almost a year. I have read some of the most spectacular books. One of those books author is with me today. Today, I'm going to talk about Juno Loves Legs, a book you saw me rave about probably the beginning of last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. And its author is Carl Geary. Carl, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Oh,
Appreciate that.
I are you kidding? This is such a pleasure. I was saying to a friend, I get so nervous before these things, but Carl and I have been talking. We logged on almost 20 minutes ago, and we've been chatting about everything under the sun, from New York City to Vermont to writing and everything in between. So I just know this is going to be an absolutely incredible conversation. You are joining me from Glasgow. So
Yeah.
I think you take the award for the furthest author interview.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah. No.
our Wi-Fi is working, and we seem to be, we're gonna like cruise right in. I do want to say, and Carl and I were talking about this before we started recording, that although this is not a book with, it's not like a thriller where there is going to be a huge spoiler. There are some things that happen that are that we do want to talk about, but we're kind of going to dance around a bit. And we're gonna, what are I talking in generalities? So if you have not read this, I think you will be safe listening. That said, if you don't feel safe, when we get to those points, I will, give another disclaimer, and you're free to log off and come back. But my first disclaimer will be, don't miss this book, because it is absolutely destined to be in my top 10 of 2023. And I don't like say those things lightly.
Thank you so
So
much. It's so lovely to
um,
hear.
it's absolutely true. So let's start out with asking for your, what do they call it? Elevator pitch. If, tell us a little bit about Juno Loves Legs.
Yeah. Juno loves legs. There are two namesakes. It's my two main characters, Juno and Legs, whose real name is Sean. And it's a story that takes place in Dublin in the mid 80s and goes up through to the late 80s. And it follows their trajectory. And I suppose really, it's a book about connection and friendship and love and courage, I think, to some degree, and non-courage maybe. It deals, their background is very difficult. It's an impoverished background. The At that time in Ireland, it was sort of the last kind of gasp of the stronghold of the Catholic Church and their institutions. But that could, it's not a huge part of the book. More the sense of that the world is divided between people who are oppressed and oppressors, in some ways. So that's all kind of cooking in the background. But the main gist, I wanted to create a, a a platonic love affair, a love story between two people who rely on each other, for sustenance, for light, for love, for the feeling of safety and kindness. Is kind of at the core of the book, kind and unkind. I think that's,
Oh, yeah.
I'm not good at elevator pitches, but I think that's the
You did a
gist
good
of
job.
what
You did exactly.
I.
You summarized what I found in this book. There is so much. I think I said in my review, there is a very fine line in life, in literature, between devastating and beautiful. And they're really like flip sides of a coin. And this, I mean, yeah, reader beware. This is a very, this is a heartbreaking book. I just kept thinking, when are these kids going to get a break? Right. You know, and I mean, I understand. So you're right when you say like it's ticking along in the background what is happening in Ireland. And I guess, I mean, I should have clued in, like it's Irish literature. I mean, there probably isn't going to be a happy ending when we're talking about what is going on. Like it is really almost their experience and what happens to them and their families, in their schools, with their church, with their church, and what it does to their lives. It's devastating. And is this something that you wanted to, was this kind of your way of like exposing what you knew to be true, or?
Well, I suppose it is, but I would be cautious as well, because it's not a book, from my perspective at least, it's not written out of any sort of nostalgia or like the bad old days.
Right.
I was curious to see if there's parts of that universe that I would know well that would also in some ways collate to things that people are experiencing today. And so if you use Ireland as a nucleus, but it could be anywhere we're talking about. You can say, okay, well, the church was at that time in Ireland, the church would have been the ruling force. They would have influenced moment to moment, day to day people's lives in a way that maybe wasn't, that certainly wasn't from a loving place. And I think even though that institution has fallen aside, there are new institutions in place that do similar things. We were talking before about a city like New York City, and I spent a good portion of my life living in New York. You know, New York has always changed, and it's always shifted, and I think each generation kind of has its moment with it, and then it moves on, and that kind of maybe as it should be. But what we were saying earlier in our conversation before we came on was how, it might be the first time historically that a city like New York, and you could be talking about London or Paris or any of the major cities, where there's no room for the artists anymore. That, it's not a place that allows sort of the demographic to shift across the board. It's a very singular demographic. It's wealthy. And that's happening increasingly in cities. And so, the power dynamic shifts. It's not the church. So instead of Catholicism, say in Ireland, we had colonialism for 800 years, then we've 100 years of Catholicism, but now we're into a corporatism that I'm not sure that is always at the people's interest is always at the center of its desires.
You're absolutely right. That's a really good way to, well, and that does answer a lot of my questions. I people who follow me and who know what I like to read, I look high and low for coming of age stories. And I call this I do think this falls, I've read a couple of reviews. I think the Chicago Review called it as well, but it is one of the better because of how much it weaves in. I mean, and I'm not looking for the happy ending. People know that with me as a reader. I don't read light. I don't read like rom-coms. I look for deep and moving literature. And despite how much pain is in here, the life affirming friendship that these two have and the way it allows them to survive when nothing is working for them, literally, so I guess I would love to ask you, like, where did you conceptualize this? Is it something that came to you over years? Like this is not a debut. You have written before, but what I would say, what's the genesis of the story?
It's so funny. I really came to it from a side angle. I shouldn't have written this. I didn't want to write this book. I was actually, if I'm being honest,
glad you did.
Thank you. I was furious that it showed up. I was very far along with a different book that I'd researched extensively. I'd really done a lot of work. And I have a little studio where I'm talking to you from in Glasgow, and I come across here every day. There's a park. I stop and get a cup of coffee and come along. And I was just playing around with, of all things, a pen and a wee napkin. And I mean, who uses pens anymore? But I had a pen and I was just playing, and I wrote the words, "Dear legs, it's not gone my way." And that was it. And I didn't think much about it. And then I came into the studio and I worked on the other novel. And over the course of days, I just kind of kept going back like it was a sketch I was doing. I didn't even know what it was. And I just kept going back, and it was just, I liked the voice. It wasn't my voice. It was something else. And I really wanted to explore it. And then after about a couple of weeks, I came into the studio here one day, and I only had about 10 pages, and they were scattered, bad 10 pages. And then I had this typed manuscript that I'd really worked on. And I went, oh my God, it just never came to life on the page.
Mm-hmm.
And this other thing that I had no idea about, the one thing I was aware was there was a vitality in the voice. And I thought, oh man, I really want to hang out. I want to spend time with these two. And I could feel this kind of bubbling, kind of almost an affection for them. And I didn't know why. And it was, and I knew it was going to be very difficult. And it took me a long time. It took me 4 years to write it. And my last book, Montpellier Parade, it was set in Dublin in around the same era. And I didn't want to revisit the era. I wanted to move past that. I had no desire, really didn't want to. But actually, and I think when you're talking about it being heartbreaking, I think if there is anything heartbreaking in it, it's because, which I'm not taking credit for at all, but there's something in them that is, there's something they're so alive in their circumstances, and they're so brave, and I just love them. And actually now that I don't have that daily interaction, I really miss them. It's a bizarre.
I have heard authors say that so many times about characters, especially when you've spent 4 years with them.
Yeah.
That you almost don't, you don't know what to do when they're out of your life. And I think that's incredible to me, that is how you can conceptualize that. And that was going to be one of my questions. How long did it take you to write this? Well, 4 years. That's
my poor publisher.
No, that's not, I feel like that's more the norm. I'm not, I know there are authors out there that are churning out, by design, by publisher contracts, a book a year. But I don't think that yields a book that makes you feel what I felt reading this one, in my opinion.
Yeah, so some people are remarkable. They're incredible. Yeah, it takes me a while, and you're quite right. I wouldn't have it any other way. It really isn't the end result, because that's kind of, you got to let it go. So actually the work is the thing. So to show up every day and spend time with them, because also they keep surprising me. That was kind of a constant.
That was kind of going to be my next question. Did you know? And I guess, like, spoiler, if people are like, I'm not going to reveal an ending, but I don't think it's any surprise. And any review you read about this says it, like that, it isn't tied up with a bow. It's not like a happy ending.
And it's not without hope either.
No,
hopefully
it is not. And it is not. It is not.
Yeah. It's a kind of, yeah.
Did you consider, well, I guess it's a two-part question. I know some authors say that they know when they sit down and begin, page 1 or the outline, I don't know if you write with an outline, they know where it's headed. And other authors say, no, I let the characters take me, and tell me where we're going. So where do you fall with that? Are you...
Probably fall somewhere in the middle. I certainly would have markers. Like, I knew it wasn't going to be enough to spend a short amount of time in a timeline. So I knew it had to move through their lives. And I really wanted them to get to young adulthood and experience what was really interesting, very vibrant in Dublin in the late you know, it's so funny, you know, we're talking with the news lately that Sinead O'Connor has died.
Yes.
And this is very much her era. She would have been knocking around this places that Juno and
Right.
Legs are knocking around later on. And it was a fascinating time because, you know, in Ireland, certainly, we had all grown up with American television. And so we had this understanding of how, you know, life was, say, in the US, but there was nothing to impact. Like we were always amazed, like, you know, in American TV and films, you know,
Right.
people had televisions in their kitchen and kids were given cars, and we just blew our minds.
Right.
And there was little things, but then in Ireland, suddenly like certain kinds of 501 jeans were available, and
Right.
Converse runners were suddenly available. And I know these are small items, but to put it in context for people, it blew our minds. It was a big deal. We just didn't have access. And Ireland kind of, for the first time, with people like Sinead O'Connor and U2, obviously, and other bands and music that was happening at that time, it sort of, something shifted. And I always thought that that was a fascinating thing because our roots were still firmly set in the likes of, you know, heavy Catholicism, a very strict and specific way that society was run. But then you had this kind of almost punk scene happening on the other side of that amongst the youth population. So I knew I wanted to hit that. I knew that was going to be important. I knew that art was going to be important. I knew that that they were going to run aground in terms of the prejudice, in terms of what they want. Because I also wanted to make that point that, you know, not in, I didn't want to hit on, hopefully I haven't hit anyone over the head with it, but I did want to show what happens when youth and innocence runs up against power.
You did. You did. And again, no,
Yeah.
you know, no spoilers, but yeah, no, it was beautifully done. And it's a huge, I think it's a huge part, at least my takeaway was that it was, and very, how these two are impacted so so innocently. It was, yeah. Like I said, I think I also said in my review, there is just sadness on every page of this book. It's just the kind of book, you know, and I wouldn't want it any other way. That's not a criticism. It's a, you know, I applaud it. I wanted to touch on I don't know if you had any say in this, or if you've heard it, but I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and that's where I found this first. I found it on my library. I do a lot of driving. I have a lot of time where I need something, you know, sitting on the computer. And anyway, I found this, read it. I was like, oh, I'm going to try a sample, listen to a sample. Oh my gosh. The narration is absolutely incredible. And I started there, and then I was like, I don't think I was an hour in, but that I was like, I need to see this. And then people call it like a hybrid read, where you're reading along and listening. But I feel like the narration, she was so good. Lent so much to the story. Have you heard it? Did you have anything to say?
I did. I have heard it. I think you're absolutely right. She's wonderful, and they'd given me. It's a terrible way to have to select, but I was offered 5 different.
Oh, so you did? Because I've heard authors say, "Oh, I didn't have any say," and I thought, really? So that's good.
Yeah, I did, and yeah, she's wonderful. And also it's really interesting from my perspective, because I've had it in my own head and my own voice for a long time, and to hear Juno come to life in a different way, because obviously the story, for anyone that doesn't know the story, she's our narrator, and she's our eye. But no, it's amazing. It was really interesting to listen to. It was, it kind of blew my mind a little bit. And funnily enough, on my previous book, I did it myself. And I would never do it again. It's a nightmare. I don't know how to do it. It's so hard to do.
I think, well, you might, who knows, you might think it might have come off great. Like the author that I'm interviewing this Friday, Madeline Lucas, Thirst for Salt. I don't know if you've seen that. She narrated it, and
Mm,
she's Australian, and it
yeah,
is incredible. I'm
yeah,
listening to The Covenant of Water right now, and
very
Abraham,
excited about
amazing.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's good. He narrates 700 pages and he narrates it.
Wow.
Also very
Yeah,
strong. However, I have seen it go the other way. I have seen it not
yeah,
work. And I just,
yeah.
I've always thought, wow, I would hope that your publisher or the powers that be that turn these into audiobooks, thank goodness there are those people, because I think there's nothing better than being told a story. And I love
Oh,
that
yeah,
stories
yeah,
never have to be that. If I had to rely on my only reading time being when I was like sitting down at night, I wouldn't get through half the books. But now
yeah.
I can listen, basically all the time. But my point is it was one of the better. So I
Oh,
just
I'm glad to hear that.
wondered
Yeah, no, I thought she was wonderful.
if
Yeah,
you did
yeah.
have so that you selected her. Yeah.
I
I she
did. Yeah.
did she brought Juno, like Juno just felt, not that she wouldn't have in here, but it's is that, do you call it a brogue, the Irish brogue?
I suppose it's a brogue. Yeah.
Yeah, that her just, it was so, oh, I could picture the scenes with Juno and her mother and the way she called her ma. And I just, it was incredible. It was so,
That's
so.
lovely. Yeah, there is something that's it's sort of like sitting around a campfire, somebody telling you a story. It's a lovely thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said before that it's really like a form of an only way to keep childhood with you. If you are someone who
Mm,
was lucky enough to have parents who um read books to you, and I was one of those. I know that's where I fell in love with the written word. Um and then reading to my own children was so
hmm.
special. And then now at this point in my life, to find a good audiobook is just um it's icing on the cake, because it doesn't mean I don't want, like the physical copy. And let's just say, so this is one of those books that the UK cover often is different than the US cover. Have you they are
Correct.
now, and I
Actually.
always say I normally prefer the UK cover. In this case,
Hmm.
I think this cover, I know it's really hard for the people to see, but I don't know. I don't know if you have a
It's a
favorite,
lovely
but I
cover.
love
It's
this one.
beautiful. Yeah, I do too. It's beautiful. It's a great image. Yeah,
It is.
the catapults really did a wonderful job in putting that together. It's gorgeous. And that's a really interesting part to the whole process as well, where um you yeah, when something arrives, a box of books show up after all that work. It's kind of
I
an amazing
cannot
miracle.
imagine your joy. I
It's something.
cannot imagine. And
Yeah.
yeah, this cover, because I went to Blackwell's, I always check out the other cover because I just like to compare. And I was like, this grabs the vibe of it to me, of
Hmm.
these two.
It's a fascinating thing. I've never quite realized. I spend a lot of time in the US and I spend a lot of time
Hmm.
in Europe. And
Yep.
it is incredible when you walk in, you have the things that meet you as you walk into different
Right.
books. They are not the same in any way. The Europeans and the Americans, it is incredible how there's certain crossovers,
Yep.
but a lot of different people are revered in different places. It's not a smooth transition or an automatic transition at all. It's quite remarkable how different the publishing worlds are country by country. I hadn't realized.
It's quite a business, from
Well, exactly.
everything,
Yeah.
everything we hear, not one to be taken lightly and difficult to navigate. And um, just after reading Yellowface, I don't know if you've seen that book, and a lot of
No, I'm
it's tongue
excited
in
for that.
cheek, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's totally, yeah. But in terms of like an expose on the publishing world and how nasty it can get, I
Mm.
was like, wow, if half of this is true, if even half of it's true,
Mhm.
I applaud. I don't know how anything gets published, but
Well, there's good ones
so
out there too, I have to say.
what's
There's
that?
there's uh, there's good ones too.
Oh,
There's some.
absolutely. Oh,
Yeah,
there's some
yeah.
great in terms of like, I don't, work, like I say, this is a side hustle, but in terms of some of the publishers who are very kind to people like me who review and read,
Sure,
and like
yeah.
and like who are responsive, and
Yeah.
and happy to help and happy to be a liaison and all of that. There are some great ones. And then there are some ones where you just have to have thick skin.
That's great.
But okay, so I have to ask this, and if it's, I know this can be a taboo question and you do not have to answer it, but my question would be, do you have another project in the works? And if you don't want to answer it, you don't have to.
No, I'm happy to. God. Yeah, I have. And it's funny, it's moving quicker than I'd expect it. Usually what I try and do when I finish up something is I'll try and read as much as I can before I kind of feel the pull back to the desk a bit.
Right.
And it's a real luxury, and there's no better inspiration than fine work. It feels to me that it is endlessly. I'm amazed. It's funny. I don't have the most traditional educations, and so I always feel like I'm trying to fill black holes or gaps in my education, and so I think you tend to overcompensate somewhat with that.
Right.
But I would just read, and so there's a certain point, there's a kind of a bursting out point, and I remember hearing that some authors won't read when they're working.
I just talked about this with the last author I interviewed. They're worried about
being drawn.
Something.
Yeah. Yep. I remember somebody, Jan Carson, who's somebody I'm very huge fan of, as an author over here. And she said that you wouldn't, if a musician was in the studio doing an album, they'd still listen to music. And I thought that was really true, that really made sense to me. And so actually I try and continue to read a couple of hours every day when I'm working. And it's great. It's just you're engaged in language, you're engaged in the spirit of language, is the way to language. And I think it has an impact, a good impact for me anyway. I like that. But to answer your question, yeah, I do have a piece on the go, and I don't know. Yeah, it's moving. It's moving. It's very different.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. And actually, it's funny. I've been reading books that have like more humor in them. Okay. And I mean, I personally, I find Juno and Legs, I think they're very funny.
Yeah, no, they are.
Not
they
necessarily everybody's kind of funny, but I find them very funny, and sharp, and yeah,
somewhat self-deprecating at times.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It's so you know what? If you didn't laugh, you'd cry. It's one of those things that it's literally the embodiment of that.
Yeah. But yeah, working away.
Great.
I have
great. That is very, very good news. And I did give you warning about this, and I always wrap out my conversations with asking, like, who are some authors who you like to recommend, who have inspired you, or books that you've read? It can be anything, books you've read recently and want to recommend, or books that are your favorites of all time, whatever. Just talking about a little bit about you as a reader.
I think the book, more than any book, that not just knocked my socks off, I read it about 2 or 3 years ago, and I've revisited it since just to kind of go, how did she do it? And it's Annie Ernaux. It's a book called The Years. She's a French author. I think she was recently nominated for the Nobel Prize, I think, last year or the year before.
She was.
She was, right? Yeah.
She was, yep.
Or she won, rather. Yeah.
Yes, no, she won for the body of her work. Yep. Yeah.
And that book, in particular, The Years, I mean, Simple Passion is also an incredible book, but The Years is remarkable. It's an incredible book, and I'd encourage anybody to have a go. What she manages to do is sort of take what is personal and universal at the same time and blend the two of them into this mix of an entire sense of somebody's life. It's incredible. And then she does this. That's kind of a chunk of a book, a bit of a block. With Simple Passion, it's like a pamphlet nearly. It's less than 100 pages, I think. And it's a love affair that takes place over the course of a year, and we never meet the object of her affection. It's just the effect that this affair has on her. And it is incredible what she does in 100 pages. You wish you could do it in 1,000. Amazing.
I agree with you. My middle daughter and I have a podcast, and it's called Generations. And our May book was Annie Ernaux, and was one of her books, and the one about her mother. Is it that one, The Years? Is it the one about her mother?
Well, the
No,
mother certainly would feature in it, but no,
yeah,
I
no, well,
don't think so.
I'm
Yeah,
literally blanking. But when you say pamphlet, that's literally the word we kept using. It's under 100 pages. But
yeah,
the fact that what she is able to do and the emotion she conveys, and you're right, like universal experience,
yeah,
yet also very personal. And yet you never wanted for more. I didn't feel like, oh, I didn't get
no,
enough out of that. I'm so glad that she is getting her,
due.
the
Yeah,
accolades that she
yeah,
deserves in the literary world, because we loved discussing her. And
yeah.
just
She's very.
my daughter then just went on to read everything she could get her hands on. And yeah, Arnaud is having a moment. And I love hearing that you feel
Yeah,
the
yeah.
same, that you
I,
feel the
I
same
also
way.
think she had a difficult time of it, not so much in France, but in other places where
Yep.
it was kind of considered almost domestic, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Like it wasn't real art. And actually, when you start to explore her work and really pull it apart, you realize it's so incredibly rich. There's so much in it. And the generosity of what she does with her work, she is really, truly amazing. She's amazing.
She did.
And
The establishment was really hard on her
yeah,
when she
that's right.
was,
Yeah.
because I watched a lot of interviews with her
Mm,
as we prepared for the podcast, and
yeah.
she said that in one of her acceptance interviews. She said, "Yeah, the elite, the men, or like,
Yeah.
this isn't
Yeah.
what we give awards for. This is the
Yeah,
type
that's
of
right.
thing."
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I thought, props to her for having thick skin and just like walking the walking the walk. And now I know when Sophie goes into her corner bookstore up in Sophie's on the Upper East Side, and asks for Arnaud, and they're like, oh, we're sold out again. And she's like,
oh,
that's
that's great.
great,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
great, that's what we
yeah,
want to
that's really
hear. But
nice. That's right.
yeah, I think you're right, it was a long time coming that she wrote and wasn't, I suppose that's probably more the way. But anyway, well, you
Yeah,
struck a chord with saying Arnaud, so I
good.
didn't mean to
Oh,
interrupt you there.
excellent. No, not at all. There was two, actually, I brought them along. There was two books I picked up. I was just when I was last in New York, and I'm trying to keep it so that it's stuff that's available in New York. And I picked up two books that were really kind of amazing. One is Sleepless Nights. It's Elizabeth Hardwick.
Okay.
Um, and it's kind of a essay memoir type thing again, but it's set in New York. And she comes up to New York from the South, and she spends time with people like Nina Simone and that. But she was kind of I mean, it's so the quality of the writing is really amazing, and I think she's kind of been brought back in. She's kind of another one of those people who were overlooked a little bit in her life, although she was heavily involved in publishing and creating. I mean, she was a real force of nature in New York. But her writing is excellent. And then the other book, which I'd read when I was younger,
Right.
which impacted me more. You know the way sometimes you come across something when you're younger and you just kind of think, I'm not. You actually have to put in some miles, come back to it, and then you're like, oh, I
Absolutely.
totally get it. Yeah. So that was by Grand Central Station. I sat down and wept, which is a roll off the tongue. It's Elizabeth Smart, and she was really a poet. Actually, this is her book here,
Okay.
and it's yeah, it's a small little punch in the face. It's
So you like
it's
to be
kind of
punched in the
amazing.
face as a reader too. You
Well,
like,
I don't. I think there's a move lately towards being left that art is supposed to comfort us in some way.
mhm,
And as I grew up, that was never the purpose. It was supposed to challenge and upset the status quo. And I think that's
interesting.
important. I
Yep.
think it's a really important thing that we aren't seeing quite enough of. It should fracture our own way of looking at the world so we can look at it from different perspectives. Um, I think it's really important to read from perspectives that wouldn't be my perspective or your
Right.
perspective, or and then the conversation continues. You are engaged in a different way, whereas I feel like there's a lot of kind of bunker we're behind it. Well, I only read on from this point of view,
Yep.
And I think it's the death of conversation and communication. And if that continues, art gets smaller. And I don't think
That's so
that's
well
a great
put.
place to be. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they tell us that it increases empathy, and I do agree. There's nothing like
Mm.
reading a book and just being shook, as they say, and unsettled, and that a piece of writing that is provocative and makes you think all the things, and that is exactly what this book did for me. I absolutely loved it, and if I make it part of my mission to just get it in front of as many people as
Oh, that's
possible.
really kind.
And
Thank you.
I'm so grateful to you for taking the time. I know you're very busy and traveling, and this was delightful. It was
It's a
just
pleasure. Thank
delightful.
you so much for
I'm,
asking me. I really
oh my
appreciate your
gosh.
support.
I'm so,
Yeah.
and I so look forward to the fact that you're writing again. Please keep me
Thank you.
posted.
I
Please
will.
keep me
Yeah.
posted. I would love to get that out there too.
Okay. Thank you
All
so
right.
much for your
Thanks
help.
so much,
It was lovely
Carl.
to talk to you. Bye bye now.
Lovely to talk to you too. Okay.
Bye bye.
Bye.